Supply chain resilience is no longer a background issue. For Western militaries, it is now a frontline capability. In a geopolitically fragmented world, logistics cannot be treated as a quiet support activity that simply follows operational decisions. It shapes what is possible. Great power competition, regional conflict, contested trade routes, cyber risk, and fragile industrial capacity are all changing the way military supply chains need to be designed. Ukraine, Gaza, and Taiwan each show a different type of vulnerability. Ukraine highlights the need for decentralised and survivable support. Gaza shows the difficulty of operating logistics in constrained, complex, and highly visible environments. Taiwan exposes the strategic risk of dependency on critical materials, semiconductors, and narrow supply corridors. The message is clear. If supply chains fail, operations fail. That means resilience must replace pure efficiency as the dominant design principle for military logistics. For many years, globalization gave organizations efficiency, scale, and lower cost. Long international supply chains, open sea lanes, predictable trade flows, and specialist suppliers help keep goods moving in peacetime. But those same design choices can become fragile when the world becomes more contested. Open sea lanes can no longer be assumed. Predictable trade flows can be disrupted by conflict, sanctions, blockades, cyber attack, port closures, or political pressure. Single-source suppliers can create strategic risk, especially where critical materials or components come from one region or one narrow industrial base. The key issue is speed of escalation. A disruption that begins locally can quickly become global. For Western militaries, this matters because operational readiness depends on the ability to sustain people, platforms, weapons, spares, and equipment under pressure. Globalization delivered efficiency, but it also created exposure. The task now is to understand that exposure before it becomes operational failure. The lesson from Ukraine is that survival depends on distributed support. Modern conflict places fixed infrastructure under pressure. Large depots, centralized logistics hubs, and predictable supply routes can become vulnerable when they are visible, targetable, and dependent on stable communications. That is why dispersed stock matters. If all critical stores are held in one place, the force inherits a single point of failure. But when stock is distributed intelligently, the system becomes harder to break. Mobile maintenance is also important. Repair and recovery need to move closer to the point of need, especially when platforms, vehicles, and equipment are under constant pressure. Redundant communications are another key requirement. Logistics cannot stop simply because one system, network, or command route is disrupted. Ukraine shows that resilience comes from having options. In contested environments, centralization may look efficient, but too much centralization can become dangerous. Survival depends on distributed support. Modern military capability depends on critical materials and advanced technology. Semiconductors, rare earths, batteries, sensors, communications equipment, and precision components are now central to defence readiness. But many of these supply chains are geographically concentrated. That creates strategic vulnerability. If a critical component depends on one country, one supplier, one processing location, or one trade route, then the whole capability may be exposed. This is particularly important when looking at Taiwan and the wider semiconductor ecosystem. Technology dependency is no longer just an economic issue. It is a military readiness issue. Strategic reserves can help protect continuity. Allied production can reduce single points of failure. Supplier diversification can reduce exposure to political or geographic shocks, but these options require investment before the crisis arrives. Resilience may cost more in the short term, but failure costs more when the result is grounded platforms, delayed upgrades, or reduced operational availability. Dependencies become strategic vulnerabilities when they are not understood. Contested logistics needs agility. Traditional logistics models can depend on bulky convoys, predictable routes, and slow manual planning, but in contested environments, those patterns can become vulnerable. Agile, digitally enabled logistics helps turn complexity into decisions. Autonomous resupply can support last-mile delivery where access is dangerous, constrained, or unpredictable. Digital twins can test disruption scenarios before they happen, allowing planners to understand how networks behave under stress. Predictive analytics can help optimize readiness by identifying risk, likely demand, route pressure, and supply constraints earlier. Control towers can give logistics teams better visibility of stock, movement, risk, and delivery performance. But the value is not in the technology alone. The value is in faster, better decisions. Digitally enabled logistics allows commanders and logisticians to see more clearly, act earlier, and adapt faster. In contested environments, precision matters. Digital logistics turns complexity into decisions. Western militaries should not train for perfect conditions. They need to train for the conditions that will actually test the system. That means exercising cyber attack, embargo, port closure, interdiction, air denial, supply delay, and degraded communications. It means asking difficult questions. What happens when the main route is unavailable? What happens when the supplier cannot deliver? What happens when the system data is incomplete? What happens when normal communications fail? Teams need to practice logistics under pressure, not just logistics under ideal conditions. This requires more than process training. It requires leadership, judgment, prioritization, and cross-functional decision-making. Civil-military surge partnerships also matter. Industry, transport providers, manufacturers, ports, allies, and commercial logistics networks all form part of the wider resilience picture. The lesson is simple. Do not train for perfect conditions. Train for disruption as the baseline. The road ahead requires a shift from efficiency first to resilience first. This does not mean abandoning efficiency. Cost, speed, and productivity still matter. But military logistics cannot be designed only for the cheapest or leanest peacetime model. Western militaries need to invest in dispersed stock, hardened infrastructure, and more robust supply networks. They need to diversify critical suppliers and supply routes. They need to integrate allied industrial capacity so that sustainment can be shared, scaled, and protected. They also need to treat logistics as a strategic battlefield enabler. Logistics is not just about moving supplies after operational decisions are made. It determines how long forces can operate, how quickly they can adapt, and whether they can sustain tempo under pressure. Resilience requires investment, innovation, and cultural change. The future operating environment will reward forces that can keep moving, repairing, supplying, and adapting when access is contested. The key message is that supply chain resilience is military readiness. Ukraine shows the value of decentralised support. Gaza shows the challenge of precision logistics in constrained and contested environments. Taiwan shows the risk of critical dependency, particularly around technology, semiconductors, and strategic materials. Western militaries must design for disruption. That means stronger data, dispersed support, alternative routes, allied industrial collaboration, realistic training, and digitally enabled decision-making. It also means recognising logistics as operational advantage. A force may have capable platforms, trained personnel, and advanced technology, but if it cannot sustain itself, its operational options become limited. So the final question is this: can your force sustain itself when access is contested? Because resilient logistics is not just a support function. Resilient logistics is operational advantage.